How did a farmer become a warrior? How did a simple farmer, who hated war, become part of the bloodiest conflict in human history? This is the story of a man who never wanted to pick up a rifle. Yet when the moment came, he changed the course of a battle. Before the war, he questioned God. During the war, he restrained himself. And after the war, he rejected fame. October 8th, 1918. A forest, one lone soldier, and 132 enemy prisoners. This is not the story of becoming a hero. This is the story of conquering one's conscience. A man who did not want to be a warrior, Alvin Cullum York, was never meant to be a soldier, let alone a legend of war. He did not dream of battlefields, medals, or glory. He dreamed of quiet hills, honest work, and a life lived according to his conscience. Yet history has a way of choosing its heroes from the most unwilling souls. Born in 1887 in the rugged mountains of Tennessee, York grew up in deep poverty. He was one of 11 surviving children in a family that struggled daily for food and survival. Formal education ended early for him. Life demanded labor instead. Hunting was not a sport, but a necessity. And from a young age, York learned to shoot with deadly precision. Not for war, but to feed his family. His marksmanship would later astonish generals, but at the time, it was simply survival. York's early adulthood was marked by turmoil. After his father's death, responsibility weighed heavily on him. He drifted into a rough lifestyle, drinking, gambling, fighting, becoming known as a dangerous man with a quick temper. But in 1914, something changed. A religious revival meeting shook him to his core. York experienced a profound spiritual transformation, abandoning alcohol and violence and committing himself fully to his Christian faith. Central to that faith was one unbreakable belief: thou shalt not kill. York joined a pacifist Christian denomination that viewed killing as a grave sin under any circumstance. For him, violence was not only immoral, it was unthinkable. Then came World War I. When the United States introduced the military draft, York registered as required by law, but made his position clear. On his draft card, he wrote plainly, "I don't want to fight." He applied for conscientious objector status, believing his faith would exempt him from combat. The request was denied. The government did not see him as a preacher or a theologian, only as a healthy, able-bodied man. Whether he agreed or not, war now claimed him. York faced a crisis deeper than fear of death. This was a battle for his soul. To fight meant violating everything he believed God had commanded. To refuse meant prison, disgrace, or worse. Torn between faith and duty, he entered military training at Camp Gordon, Georgia, carrying a rifle he did not want and a burden he did not understand. Unlike many others, York was not mocked for his beliefs. His commanding officers, Major George Buxton and Captain Danforth, recognized the sincerity of his struggle. They did not pressure him with force, but engaged him with reason, scripture, and long conversations about moral responsibility, justice, and the defense of the innocent. For nights, York prayed. He searched the Bible, he wrestled with his conscience, and slowly, painfully, he reached a decision that would change history. He would fight, not because he wanted to, but because he believed that in this moment it was his duty. Unwillingly, a farmer stepped onto the path of legend. Alvin York did not become a soldier the moment he put on a uniform. His transformation was slower, quieter, and far more painful than that of most men around him. At Camp Gordon, while others trained with excitement or resentment, York trained with hesitation. Every drill, every rifle exercise, every shouted command forced him to confront a question that refused to leave his mind. Was he betraying God by learning to kill? His resistance was never rooted in fear. Those who observed him closely understood that York's struggle came from conviction. He was a man bound tightly to his faith, willing to endure ridicule, punishment or imprisonment rather than violate his conscience. Major George Buxton, a deeply religious officer and a graduate of West Point, recognized this immediately. Instead of dismissing York as difficult or insubordinate, Buxton chose dialogue. He invited York into long, thoughtful discussions, conversations not about orders, but about morality. Together, they examined Scripture. Buxton pointed to passages that spoke of defending the innocent, restraining evil, and the moral responsibility placed upon those with the ability to protect others. He argued that there was a difference between murder and duty-bound combat, between violence for gain and violence used as a last defense. York listened, but he did not surrender easily. He questioned every interpretation. He prayed relentlessly. Night after night, he sat alone with his Bible, searching for certainty. He asked himself whether refusing to fight truly honored God, or whether allowing others to be slaughtered while he stood aside was a greater sin. Eventually, his commanders granted him leave to return home and seek guidance. Back in the Tennessee mountains, York spoke with church elders, prayed in solitude, and reflected deeply on the choice before him. When he returned to Camp Gordon, his decision was made. He would fight only if necessary, not out of hatred, not for glory, but out of responsibility. Once this inner conflict settled, York changed. He trained with discipline and seriousness, mastering his rifle with extraordinary precision. His marksmanship amazed instructors, yet York never celebrated it. Each shot carried weight. Each skill learned was a burden accepted, not a talent enjoyed. When York shipped out to Europe, he was no longer arguing with his faith. But peace did not follow him. The war was brutal, chaotic, and relentless. France was nothing like the hills of Tennessee, and death was everywhere. By October 1918, the war had reached its most violent phase. American forces were advancing through dense forests filled with entrenched German machine gun nests. York and his unit were about to step into history. October 8, 1918, the day the forest turned silent. The morning of October 8, 1918, dawned cold and unforgiving in the Meuse-Argonne forest of France. The air was thick with smoke, damp earth, and the distant roar of artillery. American troops were ordered forward into one of the most heavily defended regions of the Western Front. Corporal Alvin York was part of a small detachment of 17 men assigned a perilous mission: move behind enemy lines and silence the German machine guns that were devastating American forces below. It was a task few expected to survive. At first, the mission succeeded beyond expectation. York's unit surprised a group of German soldiers resting behind the lines and captured nearly 20 without firing a single shot. For a moment, it seemed the impossible had been achieved. Then the machine guns opened fire. From higher ground, German positions erupted with bullets. Trees splintered, men fell. Within seconds, York watched his comrades collapse, killed or wounded before they could react. The sergeant and other leaders were dead, Half the unit was gone. Command fell suddenly and unexpectedly to York. Pinned to the forest floor, York understood the reality instantly. If he did nothing, everyone left alive would die. Fear was present, but it was overridden by responsibility. Carefully, he crawled to a position where he could see the enemy. The Germans held the advantage, numbers, elevation, and firepower. But they did not know exactly where York was. York steadied his rifle. What followed was not chaos, but precision. Drawing on years of hunting in the Tennessee mountains, York fired deliberately. One shot, one target. German machine gunners fell one by one. York shifted positions constantly, preventing the enemy from locating him. When several German soldiers charged downhill with bayonets, York switched to his pistol. Calm and controlled, he fired from the rear of the formation forward, an old hunting method, to prevent retreat and force hesitation. Within moments, 6 attackers were down. Silence began to spread through the forest. Confusion overtook the German ranks. Unaccustomed to facing a single unseen marksman, fear replaced coordination. A German officer eventually raised his hands and ordered his men to surrender. York stopped firing immediately. When the smoke cleared, the outcome stunned everyone. York had killed 25 enemy soldiers and captured 132 prisoners, alone under constant fire. He gathered the surviving members of his unit and marched the prisoners back through the forest. Officers struggled to believe the reports, but the prisoners were real, the weapons were real, and Alvin York stood quietly among them, shaken not by victory, but by the weight of what he had done. When Alvin York returned from the Meuse-Argonne forest, disbelief followed him. Officers questioned the reports. No single soldier, they argued, could have silenced multiple machine gun positions and escorted more than 100 prisoners back alone. But the evidence could not be ignored. Captured weapons were counted. German officers confirmed the account. Surviving American soldiers testified to what they had witnessed. What had seemed impossible was now undeniable. York's actions had broken a critical enemy defense and allowed American forces to advance, saving countless lives. He was promoted immediately. Soon, recognition poured in from around the world. York received the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration. France awarded him the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honor. Parades were organized in his name. Newspapers hailed him as a symbol of American courage. Yet York did not celebrate. He accepted medals with lowered eyes and quiet words. He never described himself as brave. He insisted that he had only done what was necessary and that the men who died beside him were equally deserving of honor. When the war ended, fame followed him home. Publishers offered book deals. Film studios proposed contracts. Advertisers promised wealth beyond anything he had ever known. York refused them all. "I cannot take money for killing men," he said. "Their blood would be on it." Instead of pursuing fame, York returned to the Tennessee mountains. He married, farmed, and sought a simple life. But he did not turn away from responsibility. Using his name not for profit, but for purpose, he began raising funds to build schools for poor rural children. Children who, like him, had grown up without opportunity. When a film about his life was eventually made, York agreed only under strict conditions. The story would emphasize faith, humility, and duty, not violence. Profits would support education. The result was Sergeant York, 1941, a global success. Awards followed, praise returned. York remained unchanged. A quiet life of service, struggle, and moral strength. Fame did not protect Alvin York from hardship. Despite his global recognition, his personal life remained marked by financial difficulty and physical decline. The schools he helped establish required constant funding, and York often found himself stretched thin, giving more than he had. Ironically, the man who refused millions struggled with taxes, debt, and legal disputes. These challenges sometimes overshadowed his public image, and criticism followed. York bore it silently. Health problems worsened with age. Arthritis, failing eyesight, and repeated illnesses drained his strength. Medical bills mounted. Friends, veterans organizations, and supporters eventually stepped in to help. But York never expressed bitterness. During World War II, the government again sought his voice. Though too old and unfit to fight, York supported the war effort through speeches and training support. His message remained consistent. War was never glorious, only sometimes unavoidable. Privately, York lived with the memory of October 8, 1918. He never glorified the men he killed. He spoke more often of the prisoners he spared. Mercy, to him, was as important as courage. His faith remained central to his life. He taught Sunday school, attended church faithfully, and lived by the values that once placed him in conflict with military service. Those who met him expected a legend. They found a humble farmer. In his later years, illness confined him largely to his home. Still, he remained dignified, grateful, and resolute, never seeking sympathy, never rewriting his past. A legacy greater than war. When Alvin Cullum York died in 1964, the nation honored him with full military rights. Flags were folded, soldiers stood at attention, speeches praised his bravery. But York's greatest legacy was never about war, it was about conscience. He showed the world that true courage does not begin with pulling a trigger. It begins with questioning whether one should. He resisted war until he believed action was the lesser of two evils. And when that moment passed, he stopped. York never allowed violence to define him. He rejected wealth born of blood. He used his fame to educate, to serve, and to build rather than destroy. He proved that a man could be forced into war without becoming consumed by it. That humility could exist alongside heroism. That moral struggle mattered. Alvin York did not want to fight. He was compelled to. He acted when necessary. He showed mercy when possible. And he spent the rest of his life choosing service over celebration. That is why he remains more than a soldier. He remains a reminder that the greatest battles are often fought within, and that winning those battles requires character, not weapons. We try our best to bring meaningful and truthful history to you, stories that inspire, teach, and remind us of the values that shape humanity. Your appreciation is our strength. Every like, every share, and every subscription encourages us to research deeper and present even better content for you. If you value thoughtful history and honest storytelling, support us so we can continue this journey together. Like, share, subscribe, because preserving history is a responsibility we all share.